Okay, so well, we'll switch to English, the official language of the speaker
Mhm.
series. So welcome everyone tonight to our seminar number 6 with Chloe on sport nutrition. So for those of you who maybe have not logged in before, my name is Ida and I'm a sports scientist, a postdoc in Montreal at McGill University and at the Institut National du Sport du Québec. And right now I work with the short track speed skating team and I am an assistant coach at McGill for cross country and track. Yeah, and I'm the host of the speaker series for the summer as well. So before I begin, I will go over some of our, I guess, logistics I always go over. So this talk is being recorded, but just like the presentation portion, and then the questions are not being recorded. So feel free to ask whatever you'd like to ask, whatever you feel comfortable asking. And for the questions, you can use the chat box throughout the presentation as well as during the Q&A period. And I can read off the questions as they come in during the Q&A period as well. So that's about it for our logistics, I believe. And before we begin, I will introduce Chloé, our speaker. So our guest speaker for tonight is Chloé Fleurent-Grégoire. Chloé is a registered dietitian, currently working as a clinical dietitian and completing a master's in nutrition at McGill University. So Chloé received a degree in nutrition from McGill University while also completing a minor in kinesiology. Since then, she has worked as a clinical dietitian in research at the MUHC in Montreal and in private practice. So during her undergraduate degree at McGill, Chloé competed as a martlet in cross country and track, running mainly the 1,500 and 3,000 meters in track. She finished a successful 5-year varsity career last spring and now runs with a local club in Montreal, competing in distances ranging from the 5 kilometers to half marathons. So Chloé is very knowledgeable in sport nutrition, both because of her clinical background and as well as her personal running background. So today's talk should be very interesting and very informative. So without further ado, I'll let Chloé share her screen and take it away for the night.
Thank you, Ida. So I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it in presentation mode.
It's good. Yeah, we just see your title slide.
Perfect. Okay, so today we'll go through an overview of sports nutrition, specifically going through fueling recommendations for runners. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. So this presentation is meant to be educational and does not replace nor does it intend to replace any personalized advice from your healthcare professional or when you're working with your dietitian. So a little bit about myself, like Ida mentioned. So I just recently finished my 5-year career as a varsity runner at McGill. Shout out, it's a great team. I really enjoyed this experience. It was a really nice ride. And so I am a cross country and track runner. So I've divided this presentation in through macronutrients. So we're going to look at fueling strategies kind of broken down through the macronutrients, and we'll be focusing on carbohydrates and protein, especially as they are essential for fueling and for recovery. So carbohydrates are our main source of energy. So we recall that they're coming from our legumes, our starchy grains, our fruits and vegetables as well. And they are the main fuel source for our muscles. And they're especially the main substrate for high intensity workouts. So over 65% of our VO2 max. So this is really the main substrate for high intensity activity. And when we're fueling for example, endurance sports, so or low intensity under 65% of VO2 max, the main substrate that is used is fatty acids. However, it's always a mix of both. So it's kind of a combination of carbohydrates and fatty acids that are being used to fuel the activity. But when we're in higher intensity, it's mostly carbohydrates. And carbs are also stored in a limited amount as glycogen in muscle and liver. It's about a finite amount, about 2,000 calories worth of carbohydrates that is stored in the muscle and in the liver. And it's also essential for focus and decision making because our brain, its preferred substrate is carbohydrates. So we need carbs for our focus as well. So all the recommendations are coming from this position statement by Dietitians of Canada. So So if you'd like more information, please go check this paper out, published recently in 2016 with the most recent guidelines. A lot of great information in this paper. So let's look a little bit deeper in the recommendations for carbohydrates. So we know that when we're in lower intensity, we don't need as much. So if we're going for a recovery run or an easy session at the gym, our requirements are around 3 to 5 grams per kilogram per day. And when we're having more intense sessions or longer distance, maybe long runs, where our requirements are increased to about 5 to 7 grams per kilogram per day. So what does this mean for a 55 kilogram runner? So 120 pounds about. This represents, so 4 to 7 grams per kilogram per day represents approximately 220 to 400 grams per day of carbohydrates. For a 70 kilogram runner, this represents, so 4 to 7 grams per kilogram per day represents approximately 280 grams to almost 500 grams per day. So what are elite athletes doing? So we can see that rugby players, soccer players are in more of that 5 to 6 gram range. However, more marathoners and elite, in the literature, elite cyclists that are training 2 to 5 hours per day or in a competition season, they can go up to almost 800 grams of carbohydrates per day. So what does this mean? That means that carbohydrates are really essential for fueling high intensity endurance sports. So they're not to be neglected. So carbohydrate requirements for performance, this is really our main topic. So the strategies that I will be focusing on are really related to maximize performance, gain the most out of our intensity trainings. So strategies before our events or before our training could be, for example, glycogen overloading. So with a carbohydrate loading strategy, this is more for endurance, ultra endurance events such as marathon or ultra marathons. For mostly track or under 10K events, we'll be mostly focusing on maybe our pre-competition meals and snacks. And we'll get into this in depth with examples of high amounts of carbohydrates, low fiber and low fat to mainly manage our digestive symptoms. There's also some strategy during exercise, so especially for events that are higher than 90 minutes, or when we have multiple events in a short period of time, we can have a strategy of having carbohydrates during our exercise. So we'll go through that as well. And then prior to our exercise training, so when intensity is a little bit higher or above an hour, then we can have some strategies for snacks with carbs and protein that we'll get into as well. Just gotta have some water. So looking at this here, I wanted to say that the nutrition strategies, so here we're talking about carbohydrate requirements, are always dictated from the objective of the session. So for example, if our objective of the session is active recovery, so an easy run, for example, then the carbohydrates requirements are probably very low or minimal because we're exercising at a lower intensity. However, we will be focusing on the more performance or high intensity side of things. So we'll go through those regular pre, during, post energy requirements. So this is our objective for our nutritional strategy that we'll be focusing on. So what is the requirements or the guidelines behind fueling for performance? Well, we want to have to plan a meal or snacks rich in carbohydrates between 1 to 4 hours before a training or a race. And this is really to provide focus and fuel the activity. We also want to stabilize our blood sugars, and we want to avoid being hungry during the activity. So our main guideline here, we're looking at 1 to 4 grams per kilogram consumed in 1 to 4 hours before. So we'll get into more specific examples. So let's say we want to have a meal before an event. Just going through my notes, I wanted to give a more specific example. So let's say we have a race that is scheduled at 6 p.m. Well, we can have a regular meal 3 to 4 hours, more than 3 to 4 hours before. So if our race is at 6 p.m., we're eating lunch around noon, that's over 3 to 4 hours before. So we need to plan a snack maybe closer, maybe 2 hours before the race. If we're having maybe a mid-afternoon race, then we can plan maybe 3 to 4 hours before. We're racing at 4, maybe at noon, we can plan 3 to 4 hours before a meal prior to our competition. And the main focus is really on starchy foods. So having about 2/3 of carbohydrates in the meal, starchy foods that can have fiber, that's okay, a normal protein amount, low fat. And this is when we're talking about low fat, it's really, we want to avoid having any fatty sauces in the meal or fried foods or fatty meats that have skin. And this is really to avoid slowing down the digestion, which can cause discomfort. So we want to select maybe more lean cut meats, avoid skin, lean fishes like tuna, maybe some chicken breasts or legumes. Focusing on here, I put some wraps, for example, with some tuna or some chicken, or having a nice pasta salad with legumes. So really 2/3 of the meal, the main component is high carbs, starchy foods, low fat, normal protein amount, when we can have a meal 3 to 4 hours before. So coming back to the other example, let's say we have a competition at 6 p.m. We're having our regular high carbohydrate meal at noon, but this is 6 hours before a competition. So we could schedule maybe a snacks 2 hours before mid-afternoon. And the main component of the snack should be carbohydrates, so up to 2 grams per kilogram if it's 2 hours prior to the competition. Moderate protein, so for example, granola bars, or maybe smoothies with a little bit of yogurt. Cliff bars have a moderate amount of protein as well. And low fat, so nothing that will cause disturbances in our GI tract. And the closer we get to the competition, so maybe if we're planning, we have a session early in the morning, we only have an hour prior and we want to get some carbs in before a session, then we want to focus on simple carbohydrates, no protein, no fat, very low fiber, so things that are maybe fruit like a banana, fruit bars, maybe more liquid or gel substances that are fastly digestible. And this is always in the goal of optimizing performance. So this is a strategy to optimize performance. So if we go in more specific examples in the amount of carbohydrates, so let's say I am a 55 kilogram runner, about 120 pounds, and I want to include a snack 60 minutes before my intensity. Well, looking at the guideline, I want approximately 1 gram per kilogram of carbohydrates in that 1 hour before to optimize performance. So having a Gatorade, 35 grams of carbs, plus a banana, plus or minus 25 grams, I'm reaching my goal of 55 to 60 grams of carb before my intensity to optimize my performance. Another example, let's say a snack 2 hours before the intensity. I have an intensity at 5 p.m. I'm having a snack at 3 p.m. I can go up to 2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates. So here I can have a bagel, and let's say I'm a 70 kilogram runner. So aiming for between 70 grams to 140 grams of carbs, up to 2 grams per kilogram. So I can have maybe a bagel with, so that's 50 grams with, for example, some jams, another 30 grams, an applesauce, another 15, maybe a little bit of protein to, because I'm still 2 hours before my workout. So to make sure I have a satiety level that is comfortable. And then I'm reaching my goal from between 1 to 2 grams per kilogram, approximately 100 grams of carbs in this snack to optimize my performance. So here are more examples that you can have a look at of different foods that are easily digestible before an intensity. So foods that we can consume a little bit closer, that are rapid source of carbohydrates that will provide some energy rapidly. But once again, there are some considerations around these pre-carbohydrates before competition or training. This is very personalized. This is only examples, and we need to respect what is the objective of the session. So these were examples for performance and to maximize the energy, maximize the glycogen stores for optimizing our gains or our performances. This is also a strategy to be sure that we're quick thinking, good level of concentration. Carbohydrates before a training can also prevent the onset of hunger. But there's a lot of things that we need to consider. And the most important when we're planning our snacks or our meals for performance, it's really looking at the time between the meal and snack and the competition. Looking at how many hours do I have, when is the competition, so I can plan my meal 3 or 4 hours before, or I can plan a snack 1 or 2 hours before. So this is really the main consideration of thinking before I plan my meals and snacks and get ready for the competition. And also practice them before the meets to make sure that you're comfortable and you're not having any GI disturbances. There are some strategies as well for during competitions or trainings. So I will go quickly here because this is a little bit more for when the intensities are a little bit longer, above 90 minutes. Maybe we have a long run with a tempo in it and we're going above 90 minutes. We hear a strategy of incorporating some carbohydrates, maybe 30 grams per hour could be an interesting way to optimize your performance or your training, or for example, your marathon, if one day we're competing in these events. It could be important when we have multiple events in a day or many races back to back. Fueling between those races, having some carbohydrate source about 30 grams per hour can also be an efficient strategy. So let's say, since in our context, if we're talking about a long run with an intensity level, we want to gain some performance. So between 90 minutes and 2 hours, well, there's a strategy we could incorporate about 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour, which is the equivalent to approximately 3/4 of a Gatorade, maybe a 1 sports gel per hour. 2 fruit to goes is equivalent to approximately 30 grams of carbs, maybe some dates, etc. So these are strategies that we can have for longer events. There are some more recommendations, a little bit more specific when it comes to ultra endurance sports or endurance to ultra endurance, so marathon and above, so above 2.5 hours. We can start including up to 60 grams and even 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But this requires a lot of practice because there can be some risk of GI disturbances. And we're coming into more specific types of gels and sports powders because we want a mix of glucose and fructose to maximize the transporters in the gut, to maximize the absorption in the gut. So we avoid having distress. So when we're coming up to maybe long trail runs, maybe a longer bike ride, stuff like that, we can start using this strategy, using a nice mix of fructose glucose. I showed some examples of Recarb has a nice ratio of fructose glucose, the GU gels as well, and Upica is a Quebec brand that has a nice ratio as well for more ultra and above 2.5 hours events or trainings. Okay, so looking a little bit more specific in protein requirements, we're going to talk more about recovery. Protein is essential for muscle synthesis, so muscle repair, building, keeping our immune system healthy, as well as having a satiety level that is comfortable, so we don't get hungry too rapidly. And the basic recommendations are quite low, but we must understand that they vary depending on if we're in older age, we have a clinical condition, or if we're very physically active. So the recommendations for endurance athletes are about 1.2 to 1.8 grams per kilograms per day. And I just wanted to really emphasize, and we'll look at specific examples of how much protein, what does this mean, 1.2 to 1.8, we'll go into that a little bit later, but I wanted to emphasize that there's no need to have extreme high values. There's no health risks. However, we don't see any benefits, and there is potential risk of diminishing our performance because we might be cutting out other nutrients like our carbohydrates, which are our main fuel source for our type of activity. So what does this represent? 1.2 to 1.8 grams for 55 kilograms, about 120 pounds athlete. This represents about 65 to 100 grams of protein per day. And for maybe a 70 kilogram athlete, this represents 85 to 125 grams per day. So that would be our global total requirement for the day. But what I want us to focus on a little bit more is, first of all, when it comes to protein, there are 3 to 4 things that we need to think about. The first thing is that recently in research, we know that it's the total amount throughout the day that is most important, not necessarily getting it right after the physical activity. It's kind of reaching the total amount throughout the day. This is really the most important to repair and build muscle. And we wanted to have it nicely, evenly distributing. So having protein throughout the 3 to 4 times in a day, so maybe 3 meals with 1 snack. And we wanted to have nice distributions throughout the day of maybe about 10 to 25 grams at each portion. And there's really no benefits of having very high amounts, like above 40 grams per day. And lastly, having a nice variety. So a mix of different type of maybe whey, soy, proteins, egg, fish, just having a nice mix, legumes, etc. Coming back to why we don't necessarily need very high doses of proteins and we want it nicely distributed throughout the day is really because in the literature we see that there's kind of a plateau above a certain amount. We don't see any additional protein synthesis. So we only need approximately 1.25 to 1.3 grams per kilogram to reach that maximal protein synthesis, which represents, for example, for that 55 kilogram athlete, that represents approximately 15 grams of protein in a serving to get that maximal protein synthesis. And for that other example of 70 kilogram athlete, that's only about 18 grams to meet that maximal protein synthesis. So this is why we want nicely, evenly distributed protein, small amounts throughout the day to kind of reach ultimately those maximal protein synthesis throughout the day. So no need for high doses in one amount. We kind of want it in small amounts all throughout the day. So snacks can help reach that nice distribution and recover well after hard workouts. So maybe placing a nice protein snack can increase that total amount and make it more evenly distributed. Often, I want to put the emphasis that it's often breakfast that is lacking protein. If we're just having toast and jam, there's kind of missing something, or maybe just oatmeal without any yogurt or soy milk. It's really just thinking, okay, how can I bump up my protein to make it nicely, evenly distributed? So maybe adding an egg, cottage cheese, or soy milk in our mix in our oatmeal, or Greek yogurt, for example, just to make sure we're having enough protein in the morning. So coming back to recovery snacks. So this comes often as a question. So it kind of depends. There's no yes or no. It's in nutrition, it's often never black or white. It's kind of always in that gray zone, and we have to think of the context, sorry. So I put these information to kind of question you and to better understand if yes or no, a protein-rich snack is necessary after a workout. So first of all, yes, it will be necessary if your training is equal and over to an hour. And if the next meal is quite few hours later, so you're training at 4 p.m. and your supper is at 8 p.m., that's over 3 hours. So yes, a protein-rich snack would be necessary. If you're exercising maybe twice in a day, you have a double. Once again, might be necessary to have a protein-rich meal close to the workout or a protein-rich snack. And if you have a double that is 8 hours closer, maybe even incorporating some carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen stores. It's also essential if your workout was very intense, you were lifting heavy weights for over an hour, you had a hard long run with an intensity, you had some maybe a nice track intervals, hard session. And once again, we might need some carbohydrates as well because of this hard intensity. So nice protein carb mix would be essential after this type of workout. So a little tip is kind of a go-to rule, if we can, not a rule, but a recommendation is kind of looking, okay, post-workout, I want, I answered yes to these situations. I want some carbs and some protein, aiming for about 10 to 20 grams of protein should meet my needs, and about 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So if I'm a 55 kilogram runner, 120 pounds, aiming for about 55 grams of carbs to replenish my glycogen stores after maybe a hard track workout and I know I'm having dinner much later. Or really placing your meals in that 3-hour window. So kind of maybe you're going for a session in the morning, you're having a light snack with carbs before, and planning your breakfast right after, so you have a nice protein and carb source closer to the workout. So kind of being strategic with your timing of your meals to incorporate this, or planning a snack afterwards. And this comes from the recommendations here that we reviewed before. So here I wanted to provide more examples about protein snacks that are about 10 grams and up of protein. So it could be 3/4 of some Greek yogurt. It could be, there's a lot of high protein milks out there now. So Natrel has a enriched protein milk now that we can add in smoothies, for example. Maybe some cottage cheese, half a cup, about 12 grams. There's also multiple bars now that are very good protein sources, like the Cliffs, for example. La Rabat has a nice protein bar now. Simply Protein is a nice other vegan protein bar as well. Quarter cup of nuts provides about 7 to 10 grams of protein. Whole grain bread with some nice nut butter as well can provide a good amount, up to 7 to 10 grams of protein as well. So here are just more ideas to enrich your snacks with some easy go-to protein sources. Even there's some nice avid, if you're not, not a big smoothie maker. Well, there's some that are that you buy that's already made, and there's already some protein added to it. So these are nice examples, additions to add to your list of snacks. Rapidly, for fat requirements, we're not going to touch it too much because, once again, we do require them in our diet. There are some essential fatty acids that we do not produce. So there are some fats that we need in our body. We don't produce them, like omega-3 coming from fish or from nuts and seeds. So we need them in our diet. However, it should not be the main fuel source in our diet, because since we are a high intensity or endurance sport, and not in the ultra endurance sport, we do require lots of carbohydrates. So there's no advantage to have a very high fat diet in high intensity sports. And this is really clearly well suggested in the literature as well. Ida, how am I doing on time?
You're doing good. It's 8:30, so you still have some time.
Okay. So I did add some additional, it's not fuel itself, but it is an important strategy to maintain hydration and electrolytes. So I did provide a couple of slides on this, especially in these hot and humid days. This is something that we forget about, especially as track athletes. It's really important to have some electrolytes as well. So we'll go through some simple recommendations. So I wanted to really focus on during. There's no specific guidelines when it comes to hydration. It's kind of very individualized, and it depends on our perspiration rate, so our sweat rate. So the higher the temperature, the warmer it is, the more humidity there is. We know that we're sweating more. So essentially, providing hydration and electrolytes will be something that will be important to think about, especially in Montreal right now. It's very crazy humid and hot. So very essential to start thinking about electrolytes and hydration, because we see that the component of exercise that is mostly touched when we're dehydrated. So let's say we lose 3% of our body weight in liquid because we're sweating during our workout. Well, we lose about 10% of our muscle endurance. So this is its power and strength is not as much as affected as our endurance. So this is why for runners, it's very essential to keep a good hydration level. So aiming for about 400 to 800 ml per hour, depending on your tolerance. And with that, we need some concentration of 400 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams per liter. And we'll look at some specific examples. So how do I know if I'm hydrated? Well, the most simple tool is just looking at the color of the urine. So looking at the urine color scale. So if we're in that 1 to 2 zone, light pale yellow, we know that we have a good hydration. However, going down the scale, this is when we start noticing that our hydration levels, we're starting to be dehydrated. And just to show, like, to better understand, something that you could do is to better understand your percent dehydration. Let's say you're going for a long run in the heat, you could weigh yourself before and right after, and you can calculate how many pounds or kilograms did I lose, how much percentage loss in water volume did I lose. And let's say we lose approximately 1 to 3%. Okay, dehydration levels might be starting to affect us a little bit, but if we're going up to 3% and more, then we know that we have a great diminish in our work capacity and in our endurance. So if we're starting to have headaches, trouble sleeping because of dehydration, this can greatly affect how we perform. So simple tricks, especially in the hot and humid days. Here are different strategies to provide electrolytes in your water during your workouts. So if we want to meet the recommendations that we just discussed, well, we could use one of these tabs or Gatorade powders to enrich our waters. So for example, the Gatorade powder provides approximately 200 milligrams for 3 scoops in 500 ml, which is in line with the recommendations of 400 milligrams per liter. So this would be a nice strategy. We could have some GU tabs or some Nun tabs, which are about 300 milligrams of sodium, and they have a little bit of potassium and calcium as well, which could be we just add 1 tab to a regular size water bottle of 750 ml, and we're kind of in that nice ratio mix of water to electrolytes. Or we could use just regular quarter tablespoon of sodium in our large 750 water bottle, or there's also some salt sticks as well, or even some powders like Epica, which is a Quebec brand that has a good amount of electrolytes. So multiple strategies to enrich your hydration with carbohydrates and electrolytes. So carbs maybe during those 90 minutes or more high intensity workouts could be a nice strategy as well. And finally, I just wanted to go rapidly throughout supplements. I wanted to give you guys some tools to look at where to find how if supplements are safe to use in the context of anti-doping code of youth sports. So I just rapidly wanted to show that there are many reasons why we might want to use supplements like sports foods, or maybe supplements for our health. But once again, this is really when we go up the pyramid. We want to make sure that we're fueling well, eating healthy, and then supplements might be an additional strategy. But this is really when we're gaining excellent knowledge around the concept of healthy eating and sports nutrition. Maybe we have a working dietitian as well that we can consult, and then we can start thinking about supplements. But rapidly, I do know that in the literature, a third to 2/3 of athletes do consume sports food like gels, protein powders, etc., or even other types of supplements. So I did want to bring up this topic, but we have to question ourselves. So is there other things that we can do before getting a supplement? Is this for a health benefit, such as correcting a deficiency? We have to also weigh the risk and the benefits. So is there a cost to this? Is there a potential risk for anti-doping codes? So all questions that should be asked before selecting a supplement. So in this paper that I spoke about, we can have a little bit more details regarding different kinds of supplements, but I wanted to go show an example. Let's say for practical reasons, we want a protein powder. We're on the go when we leave for a competition, we're in a hotel room, we need something that's practical, easy to transport, or protein bars, etc. Well, there are some nice resources, independent bodies that do check the ingredients of these supplements to make sure there's no contamination with banned substances, that they really have all the ingredients that are on the label. So when we're selecting, for example, a protein powder, make sure to look that there's a label NSF, for example, or informed choice, because these are two independent bodies that test the products to see if they have any of those banned substances, and if they have the ingredients that they say they have. So you can go, for example, on informed choice on the website and search the product you would like to use. Here I searched a Vega protein, vegan protein, often seen on the market. And here you can go look up even the batch that was tested, when was it, to really see, okay, this is it is safe to use and without contamination. So these are nice resources to go check out if you do wish to use a supplement in the future and are in a competition level where there is an anti-doping code. That is it for my presentation. I did want to show that if you wanted to have more information about supplements that enhance performance, so-called ergogenic aids like creatine or caffeine, there is a really nice paper from the International Olympic Committee consensus about dietary supplements. And these are really the ones that are well studied. They have evidence-based behind it. So please go have a look if you do have questions a little bit deeper in supplements. So very interesting, nice summary paper to go review if you have more questions about this topic. So thank you very much. I know this is lots of information, so please go review the YouTube, and also potentially Ida will have some available handouts that she may provide further on. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Chloe. That was a really good presentation. Lots of very valuable information. So before we get into the question period, I'll let you guys kind of soak in all this information that Chloe gave us. And in the meantime, I'll ask a few little transition fun questions for Chloe. So first one, what is your favorite, or what was your best race memory?
My best race memory. And you asked me this before. There's so many. Honestly, I feel like there's so many. I did go to U Sports as a 4x8, and I find just racing for a team in Manitoba, racing with like three girls that I've trained with for quite a while, was really an amazing race. So just with the teammates, and had a nice U Sports championship. That was really nice memory in Manitoba. I think that was in 2019 or 2020. I can't recall.
Okay, great. And then second question, what is your favorite post-workout or post-race food?
Watermelon.
No, that's a good one. That's
it's like good. Not special, but I feel like when I was a kid, I didn't like watermelon, and I kind of discovered it in a summer, and now I'm just obsessed. So after a long run, hot weather, watermelon is go-to.
Nice. Okay, and last question. What is one thing you learned the hard way in sport?
So I thought about this, and I thought I'll choose something more specific to nutrition that we discussed today. In sports, so not specifically to running, but I've been biking a little bit more since the pandemic as a nice cross training. And I did understand very rapidly that when we do above 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, the requirements, energy needs are so high. So I bumped so hard in a very, I think we did 110K that day, and it was way too fast for me. So my requirements were probably out the roof. I wasn't able to consume much because I was just trying to hold on. So this was probably one of the first times I really lived a very strong hypoglycemia, like felt kind of like I was drunk and had trouble walking. So I really learned the hard way that we need to eat 30 to 60 grams per hour.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Especially on the bike for those long efforts. Definitely.